Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk about what I think is becoming one of the biggest risks to the global economy because everybody keeps focusing on crude oil, how much oil is being produced, how much is flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, whether Iran is blocking shipping, whether OPEC is increasing its production. But increasingly, that's becoming the wrong question because crude oil on its own is virtually useless. You can't fill your car with crude oil. You can't fly an aircraft using crude oil. You can't heat your home with crude oil. Before any of those things happen, it has to be refined into gasoline or petrol, diesel, jet fuel, heating oil, and hundreds of petrochemical products that modern economies rely upon every single day. And right now, the world's refining system is under enormous pressure. That is becoming the real bottleneck here. And unless something changes, this could keep fuel prices elevated for a long time, even if crude oil prices eventually start coming back down. So in today's video, I want to explain exactly what's happening, why refiners are becoming the weak link in the global energy chain, and why wars in both Iran and Ukraine are combining to create a problem that could ultimately slow the global economy. Now, if you're enjoying these videos, can you please give me a thumbs up? Subscribe if you haven't done so already, hit that red subscriber button. And also if you can hit the hype button, then that would be fantastic because that promotes this video to more people and hopefully gets more exposure. Okay, so let's get into it. When people talk about oil markets, they normally focus on production. How many barrels Saudi Arabia produces, how much Iran is exporting, whether Russia can continue selling crude oil to India and China, or whether the United States is increasing its shale production. But that's only half the story. The other half is whether somebody can actually turn that crude into usable products. If you think about crude oil as flour, nobody actually eats flour. It has to be turned into bread or pasta, and that's exactly what refineries do. Without them, crude oil simply sits in storage tanks. The value comes from transforming it into products that consumers and businesses actually need. That transformation is becoming increasingly difficult. According to recent analysis, global refining capacity is now running significantly below both last year's levels and also below the 5-year average. At the same time, inventories of refined fuels have been falling while refining margins have surged, a sign that processing capacity, not crude supply, is becoming the limiting factor. So let's have a look at this first graph. So everybody that's been missing my graphs, then this is something for you. Now this chart shows global refinery throughput. What immediately jumps out is how much lower current refining activity is compared with both 2025 and the 5-year average. Normally during periods of high fuel demand, refiners increase their production. Instead, at the moment, we're seeing the opposite. The world is refining substantially less oil. That should immediately raise alarm bells because if less crude is being turned into diesel or jet fuel or gasoline or heating oil, then eventually inventories begin falling. And that's exactly what's happening. Now let's think about why this is happening. The first reason is the war in Iran. Although the ceasefire has collapsed and military action has resumed, the impact on energy markets has actually been developing for months. Crude exports from the Gulf have been disrupted, shipping has become significantly more expensive, insurance costs have increased dramatically, some producers have experienced operational disruption, and importantly, a number of refineries across the Middle East have suffered damage or interruptions, reducing the region's ability to convert crude into refined products. So we're not simply talking about fewer barrels of crude oil, we're talking about fewer barrels of finished fuel, and that matters enormously. The second major factor is Russia. Since Ukraine began systematically targeting Russian energy infrastructure, dozens of refining facilities have either been damaged, temporarily shut down, or forced to reduce production. That has fundamentally changed Russia's energy balance. Instead of exporting increasing volumes of diesel and refined products, Russia has repeatedly restricted exports in order to protect domestic supplies after refinery outages caused by Ukrainian drone strikes. This creates another problem for global markets. Countries that previously bought Russian diesel now have to find alternative suppliers. That increases competition for every available barrel of diesel, which pushes refining margins even higher. The third piece of the puzzle is China. Normally, when refining margins rise this much, you would expect China's refineries to increase production and export more fuel. Instead, the opposite has happened. China has dramatically reduced its crude oil imports. Chinese crude imports have fallen to levels not seen for almost a decade. At the same time, refinery processing has also fallen sharply. In June, crude imports fell to around 7.1 million barrels per day, down more than 40% year on year, and refinery throughput dropped to its lowest level since the early pandemic. Now, why is China doing this? Well, there are several reasons. Firstly, oil has become much more expensive because of geopolitical tensions. Secondly, China spent months building enormous strategic inventories before the latest escalation. So instead of buying expensive crude, it's been drawing down on its own reserves that it bought when prices were lower. And thirdly, Beijing has prioritized domestic energy security by limiting exports of refined fuels rather than selling large quantities overseas. Now, that may make perfect sense for China, but it removes another important supplier from the global market. Now, here's where all of those individual stories come together. Iran is disrupting crude supplies. Middle Eastern refineries have been damaged. Ukraine is reducing Russian refining capacity. Russia is restricting refined fuel exports. China is importing less crude and refining less oil. All of those events point in exactly the same direction: less refined fuel. And because virtually every economy depends upon diesel, aviation fuel, and gasoline every single day, shortages quickly translate into higher prices. The global refining output fell by roughly 5 million barrels per day during the second quarter of this year, while inventories have tightened enough to send refining margins to exceptionally high levels. This has enormous implications for inflation. Fuel costs feed into almost everything. Every truck delivering food, every aircraft transporting goods, every ship crossing the ocean, every farmer harvesting crops, every factory manufacturing products, every construction company operating heavy machinery. Diesel is effectively the fuel that powers the global economy. So if diesel becomes scarce, everything becomes more expensive. There's another important point here. Many investors assume that once crude oil prices fall, fuel prices automatically follow. But that's not necessarily true. If refining capacity remains constrained, fuel prices can stay elevated for months or even years. Building a new refinery is not something that happens overnight. It takes years. Repairing damaged refineries also takes time. So even if peace suddenly breaks out tomorrow, the refining system wouldn't immediately recover. That's why this isn't simply a short-term military story. It's becoming an industrial capacity story. The worrying aspect is that we're now seeing multiple independent shocks hitting exactly the same part of the supply chain. Normally, if one country experiences disruption, another can step in. Today, that's becoming much harder to achieve. Middle Eastern disruption is going on. We've got Russian disruption, lower Chinese refining, higher insurance costs, higher shipping costs, all happening simultaneously. That reduces resilience throughout the entire global energy system. So what happens next? Well, much depends on the events in Iran. If fighting intensifies further, more infrastructure will be damaged. If Ukraine continues striking Russian refineries, then Russian exports of refined products will remain constrained. And if China eventually returns to buying crude aggressively in order to rebuild its inventories, that would tighten global crude markets. At the same time, the refining system is already under pressure. That combination could create another wave of high fuel prices. So the bottom line for everything is this. Everyone keeps talking about oil, but perhaps we should be talking about refineries instead, because crude oil sitting in storage tanks doesn't keep the world moving. Refined products do. And right now, the world's ability to produce those refined products is under increasing pressure from two major wars, damaged infrastructure, reduced investment, and growing geopolitical uncertainty. That's why this story matters, because if the refining bottleneck continues to worsen, it won't just affect energy markets, it will affect inflation, economic growth, transport, manufacturing, and ultimately every household and every business in the world. So hopefully you found today's video useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking. If you enjoyed what I said, or maybe you didn't enjoy it but you thought it was interesting, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hit that hype button if it's available to you. I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you bought me a coffee, or sent me YouTube super thanks, or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you. I really do appreciate it. It keeps me going. Without it, I definitely wouldn't have been going this long. So I appreciate your support. It really does help me.